So we're going to start by talking about what coping strategies actually are. Then we're going to make a distinction between healthy versus unhealthy coping strategies. We're going to do a little bit about gender differences in a concept of emotional regulation and coping, and I'll talk you through what they are. And then we'll finally finish with how you can learn helpful coping skills. And there's two different types of categories: problem-based versus emotion-based. So we'll cover those, and I'll give you examples of what they are. So coping strategies are basically actions that we take to deal with stress, problems, or uncomfortable emotions, whether they're internal or external. The internal or external distinction is a really important one to make, because sometimes we need to cope with things that happen to us, and other times we need to cope with things that happen within us. And some things may require us to deal with both internal and external demands. To give you an example, losing your job would be an example of an external demand. Something difficult or stressful has happened to you, and you then have to find ways to cope with the challenges that losing your job brings. On the other hand, dealing with depression would be an internal demand. And while there isn't necessarily a traumatic external event to deal with at that time, you have to address the internal challenges that are presented by depression. Now, luckily, coping skills are generally not segregated by internal versus external demands, and good coping skills can be applied to a variety of challenges. One last thing to note about coping skills or coping mechanisms is that they're not the same thing as defense mechanisms. So we hear the two kind of thrown about quite a lot, but they're very different. So coping mechanisms are used to manage or deal with stress, whilst defense mechanisms are generally unconscious processes that people are unaware they're using. So for example, projection is a defense mechanism that involves seeing unsavory aspects of yourself in others, and it can really impact the way that you then treat that person. And it might not necessarily be intentional, but it's an unconscious process as a way of projecting some of your own insecurities on other people. So I wanted to start by just asking a question to the audience about what you do to cope with stressful situations. So when you're feeling stressed or in a difficult situation, what kind of things do you do to cope? So I'm just going to launch a poll now. So if you don't see anything on that list that is relevant to you, you can click other. And if you are happy to share it in the chat and write down what it is that you do to cope. For me, I do a variety of things, and it depends on the situation, to be honest. Sometimes it's exercise, especially if I'm feeling quite stressed or annoyed about something. It helps me to go and burn some energy. But as we're in lockdown and gyms are closing, that isn't as much of an appeal to me or a possibility anymore, because I'm not that great at exercising at home. So I might engage in some more unhelpful coping strategies. So we'll talk about what those are in a little while, but I was just keen to see what people were saying. I'll give it a couple more, I'll give it a couple of seconds longer. Okay, so we're seeing exercise coming up as the most popular one. All right, we'll end the poll and I will share the results with everyone so you can see what people have put down. So exercise is the most common, which is really good. And then we've got talking with friends and family, also really good. Some people have said that they withdraw socially, that they eat more or less, they procrastinate. Yeah, there's definitely a few things that I tend to do sometimes there as well. Some people a few of you have said, I do nothing. A couple have said that you drink alcohol, coffee, or energy drinks. So we've got quite a range there, which is good to see. There are some that are perhaps more healthier than others. So that's good. That's what I wanted to see. So hopefully you'll be able to learn something from today. And I'm just going to have a look at the chat as well to see what other people. So there's a couple of you that have said that you're not seeing the poll. We've had this before. If you're viewing it from a phone, sometimes it doesn't show up. But if you are having issues seeing the poll, then it might help to exit the webinar and come back in. But what I'll try and do is for each poll, I'll read out the question, and then maybe you can just reply and answer in the chat instead. Someone's put cleaning, stress cleaning is one. Yep, I've definitely done that, and it can be quite a relief sometimes. And then someone has said most of these seem deliberately unhelpful strategies. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but it's just an opportunity to see whether there are some unhealthy strategies that people engage in, because we all do that at times. So thank you for participating in that, and sorry to those that couldn't see the poll. So the difference between healthy and unhealthy coping strategies is that unhealthy coping strategies tend to feel really good in the moment, but generally have longer term negative consequences. So if we think about some of the examples that I just gave you, things like drinking alcohol, or over or under eating, or sleeping more or less, they usually tend to have a quicker feeling of relief or gratification. They provide those kind of more instantaneous feelings, but in the long term, they don't have a good outcome on your health. If you're drinking too much, or if you're not eating well, or if you're sleeping too more or less, all of those things can have an impact on both your physical and your mental health. On the other hand, healthy coping strategies, they may not lead to instant gratification, such as grabbing a chocolate bar. You feel a lot better when you eat that. But going to the gym, you may not feel that instant gratification, but it will lead to longer term positive outcomes. So it can be more of a conscious effort and harder to engage in healthy coping strategies. That's why we tend to fall into these unhealthy coping strategies, because they're a lot easier to reach to and they feel good quicker. But we have to be able to learn how to engage in more healthier coping strategies, because in the long run they are better. And I think most of us probably know what constitutes a healthy coping strategy. You know, we know that exercise is good for us. We know that perhaps meditating or doing some relaxation or doing something that momentarily distracts us from how we're feeling can be good. But we're not necessarily aware of the negative ones, especially the ones that involve a bit more of an emotional response, because they're often automatic. So we'll kind of talk about the different types shortly, but that's the difference essentially between a healthy versus an unhealthy coping strategies. Now, there are lots of different examples of healthy and unhealthy coping strategies. So I've just included some more common ones here, but I've also included a link to a web page down at the bottom, which has a full list of different behavioural coping mechanisms, which you might find interesting. So when you get this, either take a note of it now or afterwards when you get the recording, you can have a look at it. But Changing Minds has a lot of resources on there. But unhealthy coping strategies include substance use. Substances may temporarily blot things out, but they won't solve your problems, and they're likely to introduce new issues in your life. Alcohol, for example, is a depressant that can make you feel worse. And using substances also puts you at risk of developing a substance use problem, and it might create legal issues, financial issues, a variety of different social issues as well. Food and overeating is a common coping strategy, but trying to stuff your feelings with food can lead to an unhealthy relationship with food and weight issues. And sometimes people go the opposite extreme and restrict their eating because it might make them feel more in control. And clearly that can be just as unhealthy as well. Sleeping too much or little. Whether you take a nap when you're stressed out or you might sleep late to avoid facing the day, Sleeping does offer a temporary escape from whatever you're feeling and whatever you're going through. But when you wake up, the problem is still going to be there. And high levels of stress can also prevent you from getting the sleep that you need to function properly. You might wake up in the middle of the night or not be able to fall asleep. And that can just have a knock-on effect on other things in your life, including your ability to problem solve and make healthy decisions. Venting is one that I wanted to include in there as well. Talking about your problems so that you can gain support, develop a solution, or see a problem in a different way can be really healthy. But studies show that repeatedly venting to people about how bad your situation is or how terrible you feel without any action to try and improve the situation is more likely to keep you stuck in a place of pain rather than offering a proactive way of dealing with the situation. We all need to have a bit of a vent or a rant every now and again, but try not to get into the habit of just relying on that source of coping, because it doesn't actually result in any kind of proactive problem solving. And it can also affect the people around you if you're constantly venting to them and not necessarily offering any kind of positive information. Overspending is also one that I haven't included there, but it is sometimes quite common. And we hear people talk about retail therapy as a way to feel better, but shopping can become unhealthy, and owning too many possessions can also add stress to your life. And also spending more than you can afford will only backfire and cause you more stress. Avoiding or procrastination can also become unhealthy, especially if you're using it to avoid the situation. So procrastination might include a healthy coping strategy like cleaning or going for a walk or doing some meditation. However, if you're using it to avoid the situation, then you're not actually solving it. So it might make things worse. So for example, if you're stressed about your financial situation, you might be tempted to spend time with friends or watch TV, because that's less stress or anxiety provoking than creating a budget. But if you never resolve your financial issues, your coping strategies are only making the problem worse. Social withdrawal, a couple of people said that they withdraw socially when they're feeling stressed. Sometimes it is healthy to kind of take a step back and spend time with yourself and maybe reflect and have a period of awareness and thinking things through yourself, and that's perfectly fine. But actually withdrawing from people and kind of avoiding talking to people or avoiding seeing people as a result of how you're feeling or a situation can make you feel isolated. It can make you ruminate on things, and it can perpetuate problems. And sometimes the hardest thing is actually asking someone for help, but it can sometimes be the best thing. And social support is a really, really important factor for maintaining mental health and well-being. The healthy coping strategies include exercise, talking about your problem with someone and getting their perspective, or just validating how you're feeling, healthy eating, seeking professional help, relaxation techniques like deep breathing, deep muscle relaxation, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, using social support like people that you work with or your friends and family, and engaging in problem solving techniques. So this might be things like if you have a situation that you're feeling stressed about, like finances, like we just said, a problem solving technique would be something like creating a budget. So that's where you're actually acting on the problem. There are loads of different other types or examples, and I'll give you some more examples later on, but it will really depend on you. Now we're going to do another interactive activity. So for those that can't see a poll, I'll tell you what the question is, but I want you to read this. So this is a bit of an example of an unhealthy coping strategy, and I want you to think about what kind of consequences this might present for this person. So Daniel is angry about being passed over for a promotion at work. Rather than discussing the situation with his boss and trying to improve his work performance, he holds on to the anger. Daniel has learned to manage his anger by drinking alcohol. Drinking numbs Daniel's anger temporarily, but the problems at work remain unresolved. So now we are going to do another poll. Let me just get it up. 2. Okay, so the first question for people that can't see it in the chat is, what consequences might result from Daniel's unhelpful coping strategy? This is a multiple choice question. You can select all that you think apply. For people in the chat, if you can't see it, have a think about what consequences might result from this form of coping. The next question is, what healthy coping strategies could be helpful for Daniel? So think about, instead of what he's doing here, what could he do that might be more healthy? And I'm interested to see everyone's answers here. And I'll give it a few more seconds, and then I'll share the results. Okay, we've got. All right. Okay, so let's have a look what people have put. We've got a few answers that's looking quite good. And let's see what people are putting in the chat. Brilliant. Okay, right. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So what consequences might result? So a couple of people have said he'll feel better. He will momentarily, but in the long run, as we've seen, probably not. And it's going to create a lot of different issues if he continues to engage in this kind of behaviour. You're right, development of a physical and/or mental health problem is correct. Development of an alcohol dependency, yeah, that's absolutely a consequence that could happen. He'll avoid having an argument with his boss because he's keeping it to himself. So that's an interesting one. He may do, but it's also it would also be helpful for him if he was to share his feelings with his boss in a measured way and in a calm way. But often what happens is, if we keep things to ourselves, especially something like anger or frustration or disappointment, we start to then internalize those feelings. And when you internalize those feelings, you can start to act out in different ways, or you might engage with different behaviors as a way of coping with those feelings because they're uncomfortable and you're not resolving them, but they might not necessarily be a healthy way of dealing with them. Continued problems at work, yes. Problems in his social relationships, yes. So no one said that there'd be no consequences, which is really good. What coping strategies could be helpful for Daniel? Most of you have put calmly expressing, in fact, all of you have put calmly expressing his disappointment to his boss. I'm really glad that you all put that. A couple of you have said venting to family and friends about his boss. Again, this can be helpful, but I've had several friends that have had problems in their workplace or with their managers, and have engaged in this kind of venting without any kind of direction on how they're going to deal with it. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. Going for a walk as a way to calm his anger, yes. Yeah, so some really good answers there. And I'm going to have a look at the chat now and see if anyone put anything in there. So Daniel will get himself in a negative vicious circle. Yeah. His drinking will continue to numb him temporarily and stop him from feeling the need to approach his boss and find a solution to this and understand what he needs to do in order to get the promotion next time. Absolutely. He will never get the opportunity to then get a promotion and come out of his current circumstance. Exactly. So what I was trying to demonstrate there is that a healthy coping strategy in this response really would be to obviously calm himself down in whatever way he can, like going for a walk or whatever works best and healthy for him, but also to solve the problem head on, address it calmly with his boss, ask for feedback on what he could have done differently or what he needs to do to be considered for the promotion next time around. And that's a form of problem solving. And it's not going to give him the instant gratification of feeling well. He's still going to feel upset and disappointed that he didn't get that promotion, but instead he'll feel more in control and he'll be doing something that will then hopefully result in a better outcome next time. So that was just a little activity for us. So I hope that was. So now we're going to talk about gender differences in emotional regulation and coping skills. So I wanted to just start by talking about what emotional regulation is. So emotional regulation is a process where we influence which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we experience and express our feelings. Emotional regulation can be automatic or it can be controlled, conscious or unconscious, and may have effects at one or more point in the emotion producing process. Emotional regulation tends to involve three components, and these are: you either initiate actions triggered by an emotion, you inhibit an action triggered by an emotion, or you modulate your response triggered by an emotion. So ideally, the third component is the best way to make the most of these regulatory processes, because you are moderating them. You're not always acting instinctively. The way that we feel and interpret emotions really affects how we think, how we decide, how we coordinate our actions day to day. And every day, we face hundreds of emotion-provoking stimuli, and most of them require some action or response from our end. It's only natural at times for the mind to get hooked into some negative contemplation or unmindfully ignore emotions that after getting bombarded with so many. But it's not always the best or healthiest response to take. So it's important that you're able to learn how to regulate your emotions in a healthy way. Someone who has poor emotional regulation strategies is more likely to fall prey to mood polarities, meaning that their actions and behavioural patterns will always be at the mercy of their emotions. And you might know someone who is like that, or you might find that in certain situations you're like that. So your mood or certain emotions really dictate how you respond or react to things. On the other hand, a well-regulated person will have better balance and judgment of their feelings and actions. So emotional regulation essentially allows us to carefully judge which emotional outcomes to embrace and which ones to avoid. For example, you might feel anger, but having the ability to then make a decision whether it's right to act on that anger or to take a step back and think it through in a different way, or to moderate your response, is an essential part of our everyday functioning. And it's what gets us through building relationships in the workplace. We all have emotional regulation. Some of us are better at it than others. So it can be a skill that you might need to learn and build over time. Now, there may be some gender differences in emotion regulation and in coping. Research and public data records show that men are at higher risk of alcohol use disorders, whilst women are at greater risk for anxiety and depression. And this isn't to say that men will develop alcohol use disorders and they won't develop anxiety or depression. It's just showing that what we see from public data records of people going through treatment and through research is that generally there's that slight gender difference. Of UK adults in treatment for substance use disorders, 69% were male. And there's different reasons there's different ways to kind of interpret this data, but research has shown that men appear to score higher on rational and detachment coping styles, and higher on emotional inhibition. So I'll talk you through what these are. So rational or task orientated and detachment coping, which is associated with the feeling of being independent of the event and the emotion associated with it, are considered to be two adaptive styles of coping. These are essentially an example of taking a step back from a situation and evaluating how to react to it in a more rational way. So this is good. On the other hand, emotional inhibition can be a potentially harmful method of coping with stressful or emotional events. A person with emotional inhibition tends to hold back emotions in situations where it would be healthier to express them. Feelings like anger, joy, affection, vulnerability, they get stifled. Emotional inhibition is based on trying to act rationally and impersonally at all times, regardless of what's going on inside. Someone who engages in this kind of behavior may feel embarrassed or ashamed to feel or express certain emotions, or you might fear disapproval of or losing control. If you find it difficult to tell people how you feel or see yourself coming across as wooden, you might find learning about emotional inhibition useful. Withholding your emotions may mean that you're more likely to engage in alternative and potentially unhelpful coping strategies, such as displaced aggression, distancing yourself, or repressing feelings. And that can then result in kind of these more unhelpful coping strategies like substance misuse. Now, although research suggests that there are differences in the way that men and women respond to stressful situations and apply coping strategies, it's important not to generalize. So generally speaking, there is a larger inconsistency or variance in outcomes within groups, for example, comparing behaviours and responses of different men, than there is between groups, or for example, between men and women exclusively. So in other words, although these differences have been found, don't just assume someone will react in a certain way based on their gender. But I thought it was interesting to include these points, and I've included the references down there if you are interested in reading the research around it. So learning helpful coping skills. There are two main types of coping skills: problem-focused coping and emotion-focused. When you're feeling distressed, it's important to ask yourself, do I need to change my situation, or do I need to find a better way to cope with it? And then you can decide what type of coping strategy will help you better. So problem-focused coping involves changing or addressing the source of stress. And it's helpful when you need to change your situation, perhaps by removing a stressful thing from your life. For example, if you're in an unhealthy relationship, your anxiety and sadness might be resolved by ending the relationship as opposed to soothing the emotions associated with it. Whereas emotion-focused coping is changing or addressing the feelings associated with the situation. And this is usually when the situation is outside of your control, or you aren't necessarily able to change it. So this is helpful when you need to take care of your feelings, when you either don't have a way to change your situation immediately, or when circumstances are out of your control. The current lockdown is a great example of this. I think a lot of people are experiencing a whole array of emotions to do with the second lockdown, with things going on in politics, like loads of things. So those situations are outside of our control. So we need to work out the best way to cope with those emotions in a healthy way. Now, there isn't always one best way to proceed. Instead, it's really up to you to decide which type of coping skill is likely to work best for you in your particular circumstance. So we've got another example here. So this is around reading a performance review. So imagine that you open your email to find your annual performance review. The review states that you are below average in several areas, and you're surprised by this because you thought you were performing well. You feel anxious and frustrated. Now, what I'm going to do is launch a poll that has different types of coping skills, and I'll read it out so that the people who can't see it can answer. So the first one is you go to your boss and you talk about what you can do to improve your performance. You develop a clear plan that will help you to do better, and you start to feel more confident about your ability to succeed. Is this emotion focused or problem focused? That's number one. Number two is you spend your lunch break reading a book to distract yourself from catastrophic predictions that you're going to be fired. After work, you exercise and clean the house as a way to help you feel better so that you can think about the situation more clearly. Is that emotion focused or problem focused? Okay, well, everyone so far, let's have a look at the chat. Yeah. So, okay, while I've got that up, I've got one question. Is your emotional regulation impacted by your mental health? It's not very clear cut, but it can be sometimes. So sometimes people that have depression can experience difficulties regulating their emotion. If you think depression is largely a kind of a cognitive difficulty, and it's largely based around low mood. So and that can be impacted by lots of different things and lots of different factors that might be going on in your life or day-to-day situations. And so sometimes people struggle with actually regulating those emotions so that they're not always feeling low or stressed or anxious. So the two can be linked, but it's not necessarily a clear-cut causal effect, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to stop the poll, share the results. So most of you answered correctly. One person got them the other way round. But yeah, the first one is around problem-focused coping. They've gone and they've spoken to their boss and developed a clear plan that would help them do better, which is addressing the problem. And then the second one is emotion-focused, because they're engaging in something that is helping you kind of manage the feelings and take a step back and think about how you can then approach the situation a bit more clearly. So healthy emotion-focused coping skills help you to deal with your emotions in a healthy way. These coping strategies might be things that soothe you, temporarily distract you, or help you to tolerate your distress. And they may also help to alter your mood. So whether you're feeling lonely, nervous, sad, angry, emotion-focused skills can help you to deal with your feelings in a healthy way. Sometimes it's helpful to face your emotions head on. For example, after the death of a loved one, it can help you to honour your loss if you face the grief that you feel and the loss head on rather than trying to avoid it. But other times you may need to find a way to temporarily distract you or calm you down. So I've included some lists of healthy emotion-focused coping skills. Again, they will completely rely on the individual, and it will depend on what works for you and your kind of personality and your behaviour. For some people it's cleaning, cooking, colouring. They have adult colouring books which can be really helpful. For me personally, I know that exercise or going for a walk is a really good thing. Other people find it helpful to make lists of things that they feel grateful for. But then for other people, it can help to do more kind of physical exercises like breathing or relaxation. So I've use a relaxation app. That could be any, but obviously we would hope that you would use the Thrive app if you have access to it. There's lots of different relaxation exercises in there. Deep and progressive muscle relaxation we find is really, really popular. It's a 7-minute session, and it's a real mind-body exercise. And you go through the process of tensing different muscles in your body, releasing the tension, and it can really help you to switch off and get to sleep as well if you use it before bed. But it might be talking to someone, it might be writing in a journal. There's obviously a lot more, but this is just some examples of healthy emotion-focused coping skills that you might use to deal with some of the things that you're experiencing. Now, healthy problem-focused skills are, as we've seen from the example before, really help you to tackle a problem head on and can eliminate the source of stress depending on the situation that's actually making you feel that way. It might include changing your behavior or making a plan of what steps you'll take. It might involve taking more drastic measures, like we said, like we gave an example earlier, like ending a relationship that's causing you distress. Or if you're having continued problems at work or not necessarily feeling engaged, it might be better to find a new job. It might not be the best one for you. But examples of a healthy problem-focused scoping include asking for support from a friend or a professional, and that support is, how can I tackle this? It can also be things like creating a to-do list. If you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you've got lots of things to think about and loads of things on your plate, then having a to-do list can really help you to kind of have a bit of a mind dump and not pressure yourself to hold it all up in your head. Engage in problem solving. So often when we worry about things, the worry starts with a what if, and it's usually hypothetical. So we might think, what if I catch the virus? What if I get made redundant? What if my partner leaves me? And they might be based on realistic assumptions, but they're very hypothetical and they haven't happened yet. So engage in problem solving and think, okay, well, what would I actually do if that happened? And if you start by kind of teaching your brain to sort of approach issues in that way, it can help you feel more in control and actually help you to tackle things or to feel more prepared if they do happen. Establish healthy boundaries. So you might have a friend that constantly makes digs at you or makes fun of you or doesn't make you feel very good. So you have to establish healthy boundaries and say, I'm not going to spend time with you if you continue to do this. Or you might just slightly distance yourself from that person because it's better for you to address that problem than continue to spend time with them. Walk away from a situation that's causing you stress, and work on managing your time better. So especially while we're all working from home and we've got access to our laptops, our phones, there's this technology overload. So try and manage your time better. If work is a cause of stress, you can turn alerts off on your phone, make sure that you only have access to emails on your computer, little things like that, which can help you feel a lot more relaxed and in control. Now, proactive coping skills. So coping skills are usually discussed as a bit of a reactive strategy. So when you feel bad, you do something to cope. But research shows that proactive coping strategies can be an effective way to manage future obstacles that you might face. So if you're facing a stressful life event or you've undergone a major change, try planning ahead. Consider the skills that you could use to cope with the challenges that you're likely to face or that might cause you to feel a certain way. So as a quick example, if you've made the decision to give up drinking alcohol, you might feel it's better to avoid situations that could cause you temptation or throw you off. But instead, you might try and plan ahead for the situations that have the potential to derail you, such as the Christmas period or dinner plans with friends. You might decide to tell people who will be at those events that you're no longer drinking and ask them not to offer you a drink or any alcohol. You may also imagine being offered a drink and saying no and opting for a non-alcoholic drink instead. Imagining yourself in scenarios can sometimes help you prepare and anticipate how you'll respond, and it also reduces the chance of being caught off guard. So try and think about these kind of coping skills as also an opportunity to proactively plan ahead to make you feel more resilient when challenges or setbacks do occur. And finally, finding what works for you. So the coping strategies that work for someone else might not necessarily work for you. Going for a walk might help your partner calm down, whereas you might find that going for a walk when you're angry causes you to think more about why you feel mad, and it just fuels your angry feelings. So you might decide that watching a funny video for a few minutes or doing exercise helps you relax instead. So it's important to develop your own toolkit of coping skills that you find useful. And you may need to experiment with a variety of different coping strategies to help you discover kind of which ones work best for you. And you might find that certain coping strategies work best for specific issues or emotions. For example, engaging in a hobby might be an effective way to unwind after a long day at work, but going for a walk outside might be the best approach when you're feeling sad or angry. If you're able to name your emotions, that's a really good way of kind of building self-awareness and developing better emotional regulation. And sometimes it can help to keep a journal of how you're feeling, what you did to kind of make yourself feel better, and then see if there are any patterns or behaviors that you might want to change. And when it comes to coping skills, there's always room for improvement. So assess what other tools and resources you can use and consider how you might continue to sharpen these skills in the future. So just as a bit of a recap on what we talked about today, healthy coping strategies don't always provide instantaneous relief, as opposed to unhealthy coping strategies, but they're better for you in the long run. Different situations will require different types of coping strategies. So try and learn different ones and kind of develop your toolbox. Everyone is different, so find what works best for you. And if you are experiencing a significant amount of distress and find it hard to break out of unhelpful coping habits, it's always best to seek support, because sometimes it's not always possible to do it on your own. So thank you very much for listening to the session today. I hope you found it useful. I'm going to go